So today we're going to talk about basic features of a programming language. Now let me clarify what the topic means. By the way, this looks like more like luggage, but it is basically language. So we are not going to talk about a specific syntax or programming examples of a language, let's say C, but we are broadly going to cover broadly what are the features available in any programming language. So we would not discuss about the syntax, but we would talk about let's say variables which any programming language has to support. So today, for the sake of argument, if after listening to the video, if you go and start writing your own programming language and give it to the world, you have to support something called variables because that's one of the fundamental blocks of writing a language or any programming language. So let's get started. As I was saying, one of the first basic feature of any programming language has to support is called variables. So variables and associated thing could be arrays. So variables, what are variables? So variables meaning and why variables are used. So fundamentally at a very granular level, when you write programs, what happens is really processor stores things it has to store the stuff. So for example, if you are processing a string or if you're processing numbers, ultimately they have to be stored somewhere. So your programming language, whenever you write a program, you have to assign this thing to a variable and store it. So that's why you have to have variables. So for example, if you're adding or if you're subtracting two numbers, let's say v2 minus v1, so then your program, let's say, has to take the v2 and this has to take the v1 from the user input. So the way it will accomplish that is defining a variable v2 to store what the user is entering, and also if the result is v3, then it has to store also that. So that's sort of the called a variable. Now arrays, what are arrays? So arrays is really a set of variables. So for example, if you write, let's say, okay, what would be a good example? Maybe 7 days of the week. So if you define if you have to define 7 days of the week, then you define a variable and you store, let's say, day 1, day 2, day 3, like that, day 7, right? So these are, you can think these are the variables. So if you have to store Monday, Tuesday all the way to Sunday, then you have to define 7 variables, right? And they have to be one after another. So instead of defining variables randomly, you can define an array. So you can say that as a week. Oops, let me get rid of this line. So you define a week array and you say Monday, Tuesday all the way to Sunday. So you define, so what you are defining is really so let's say we say write 7. Okay, let me write a little bit clearly. Say so you define an array called week, and which has, say, 7, meaning it has 7 elements, and then you define each of the values of this. This is equivalent to defining a variable called day 1 equal to Monday, day 2 equal to Tuesday. So see the difference between this, defining a variable this way versus this way. It's more efficient because you not only, first of all, you are obviating the need of defining day 1, day 2 all the way up to day 7. you are basically just defining one variable called week 7, and then you're storing all the values. The second part is also you are capturing the order of the variables in a nice way. Here you have to do like day 1, day 2. There is no clear-cut way to show that day 2 is ahead of day 1. But here, if you see week 7, so that means if week, so you can access the second element, and that would be Tuesday. And so let's say week 2 is, or maybe different language will have different way of saying getting the date. So week 2 equal to, let's say you will get it Tuesday, and week 2 meaning the second element and the first element equal to Monday. So then you can easily write a logic. You can easily handle that the 2 comes before 1, so Tuesday comes Monday. But here, if you define day 1, day 2, it's a little bit more difficult to capture or difficult to store the order of the variables. So I think that's sort of, I hope you got the good idea of why do we need arrays. So two things. Array is more efficient to store a set of variables where the variables are linked or has certain relation. So for example, you would not define variables which are totally random, has no relation with each other. But when the variables has a relation with each other, like if they are an element of a week, or so that was the situation when you define an array. Then there is this, what we have is basically a what we call a one-dimensional array, meaning it's set of elements. So you will also have two-dimensional array, but that's more complicated. Maybe we'll save it for later. But that's sort of the basics of variable and arrays. The next video will talk about data types and loops and etc. etc. Thank you.